Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. Once again, I'm here to talk about a black man of many firsts, and many of us probably don't even know who he is, even though he allegedly has a day in his honor. The man in question is Lincoln Alexander, who was the first black Canadian member of parliament, the first black cabinet minister, and the first lieutenant governor of Ontario. And apparently, every 21st of January has apparently been celebrated as Lincoln Alexander Day across Canada. Chances are you probably haven't heard of him or this holiday, so let's delve into a little bit of this, shall we? So Lincoln Alexander was the oldest son of Caribbean immigrant parents. I think his father was from Jamaica, or no, his mother was from Jamaica. His father was from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So Lincoln Alexander's father was a carpenter by trade, and his mother was a maid, and Lincoln himself worked as a sleeping car porter for Canadian National Railway, I believe. When his parents split up when he was a teenager, he ended up moving and living in Harlem for a bit with his mother. And this was kind of where you could argue his eyes were opened, because he saw in Harlem there were much more opportunities for black people than he saw back in Canada. And so he said of that time in his life that his time in Harlem stiffened his resolve to be more than just a porter back in Canada. So after his time in Harlem, Lincoln Alexander returns to Canada, specifically Toronto, in 1939, just after the start of the Second World War. And while he was too young to enlist, he worked as a machinist at a factory in neighboring Hamilton, which is a city across like the lake from Toronto, but still in Ontario. And it was here that he ended up making anti-aircraft guns for the British and Canadian war effort. And eventually, though, he was old enough to enlist, and so in 1942, he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. But I know what you're thinking. No, he didn't join as an Air Force pilot because his eyesight was too poor. So he actually joined as a wireless operator. And this is where he also ended up serving in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, which was this big pilot and bomber training program that was happening all across Canada. That's another thing that easily deserves its own video. And this was where he trained in Portage la Prairie in Manitoba. So after the Second World War, he's trying to turn to higher education. You know, he's got a good working background, but he's still trying to advance himself, as it were. And so he actually earns a BA from McMaster University in 1949. And then he got a degree from Osgoode Hall Law School in 1953. And this is where he gets his first start as a lawyer. So at first he practices law at a small law firm in Hamilton before starting his own firm. And then in 1965, he's actually appointed Queen's Counsel, which in Canada is basically just an honorary title that recognizes your legal contribution to the profession, as it were. So this begs the question, how does this guy go from being a lawyer and a worker into a major politician of firsts in Canada? That apparently, according to him, has to do with a 1960 tour through 23 different African nations that had a significant impact on his point of view. So reading from the excerpt, the experience was an eye-opener for me, not only as a lawyer, but also as a human being, because I began to realize what black people could do. I saw that, unlike in the Hollywood version, these Africans were men and women of significant talents. I became conscious of my blackness. I had come from a white world. Now we are in Africa, and I realized we are people of skill and creativity. I was a black man, and I was a somebody. I started standing tall. That's a hell of a trip if that's what you can get out of it. And so in 1965, he enters politics. But he did run as a conservative member of parliament for Hamilton West. He was defeated in this election, but 3 years later, he won the seat, which made him the first black Canadian to sit in the House of Commons. And in that capacity, he was reelected 4 times, serving a total of 12 years. But I do want to talk a bit more about how he comes to serve in an even greater political capacity. So in 1979, he's appointed by the ever so brief Prime Minister Joe Clark to serve as the Minister of Labor in his government, which then made him the first black cabinet member in Canadian history. But again, because Joe Clark's prime ministership was very short, Lincoln Alexander actually resigned in 1980 to serve with... he resigned his seat in 1980 so that he could serve with Ontario Premier Bill Davis as chair of the Ontario Workers' Compensation Board, where he served there for 5 years. So already he's becoming very politically active with conservative governments, both provincially and federally at this point in time. And so after his 5 years were up, on the 20th of September 1985, he was appointed as Ontario's 24th Lieutenant Governor. And for those who don't know, in Ontario and, well, all Canadian provinces, the Lieutenant Governor is the representative of the Queen for the province and the legislature of the province. That's basically how it works. Kind of like a miniature governor general, sort of the same pomp and circumstance. They have titles, they live in a special house. Laws are granted royal assent based on them providing the stamp of approval, things like that. And so this makes him the first black Canadian to be appointed to a vice-regal position in Canada, which is impressive, but then that also makes you realize we had to wait until 1985 for that to happen. One of the good things that did happen, though, under his tenure as lieutenant governor was that he became a really big advocate for fighting racism and the various sports of youth and youth well-being for the kids, basically. And he also took a far more active role in multiculturalism, which by this point was now the official policy of Canada at this point in time. And then in 1991, when his term was up, he accepted post as Chancellor of the University of Guelph, where he served there for, I think, 5+ continuous terms. The man has clearly been in some very high positions of power, and he's worthy of more attention, which begs the question why he's not. Lincoln Alexander died on the 19th of October, 2012. And I think I remember reading 1 or 2 articles about him, but there wasn't a whole lot at that time. And yet here's a man of many, many political firsts in Canada, and he should rightly be celebrated. And apparently, Lincoln Alexander Day is supposed to be a holiday. Apparently on the 21st of January 2015, Lincoln Alexander Day was observed across Canada for the first time, so I don't remember that. Do you? There is something very much amiss when a man of firsts with such, relatively speaking, grand political power and influence with these firsts is not given more attention and celebration. There's a deeply unsettling and, dare I say, disturbing element to that. And the fact that we don't know about this man and don't really sit with this disquiet among us is what's bothering me today.